Hello everyone, and welcome to another episode of Xaereth Prevails, a Grand Arena story. Today marks the first match of the extended Grand Arena Championships exhibition, where we'll play 12 total rounds against 12 different opponents and potentially reach the Kyber League. Make no mistake that my goal is always to make the Kyber League. I don't know how practical that goal is, but we're going to find out soon. CG, the company who runs this game, has changed its matchmaking algorithm for Grand Arena, which has afforded me the opportunity to play against opponents who are all extremely strong. In terms of pure GP, which rates the overall development of a roster, my own roster is significantly behind any of my prospective opponents. Luckily for me, GP does very little to describe the overall effectiveness of a roster or the efficiency by which it was built. You can see here that my opponent this round has somewhere between 300 and 400,000 more GP than I do, 200 of which is in characters alone. Whereas this is a significant margin, and my opponent does have a magnificent roster, I don't feel that I'm at an extreme disadvantage here. I hold a minor advantage in both mod speed and gear applied. Looking at my opponent's front line 4 teams, I was not surprised to see that Darth Revan had been stashed away on defense. My opponent had already demonstrated that they were capable of beating the meta with a General Grievous team instead, so it stood to reason that they would use that team on offense and leave Darth Revan on defense. Well, looking at my opponent's frontline 4 teams, there were only 2 things that I was very concerned about. The first is that L3 had Gear 13 applied, which added an extra element of uncertainty. L3, even at Gear 12, could be extremely difficult to shift on a Qi'ra team. It was very difficult to gauge how much L3 had really gained by going to Gear 13. My other chief concern for the starting 4 was how fast my opponent's bounty hunters were. They were all at or above 300 speed once you included the Jango leadership bonus. This exceeded the majority of my normal counter team's speed by quite a fair margin, and starting first against bounty hunters is very important in most circumstances. Before I let myself get too worked up about my opponent's bounty hunters team, I decided I needed to take out their Darth Revan team. The fact that my opponent was using the Sith Marauder meant that I was at risk to be one-shotted by the Sith Marauder on any given throw. Luckily, he wasn't able to finish my Sith Trooper off in that first throw, but if you see all of the debuffs that are flying around, the Sith Marauder can get to some really crazy damage output numbers. My main advantage in this match was that I outsped my opponent and outgeared them by a pretty fair margin. Still, I missed 6 banners, which may potentially bite me later. With my opponent's best team defeated, I was free to dither for over half an hour over the best option to take out their bounty hunter team. Having a faster team than a Jango-led bounty hunter team is very important, because you want to be able to mitigate the amount of damage they can do from the very start. With my First Order and Trooper teams both somehow being too slow for this matchup, I had to resort to my speed cheat team, Jedi Training Ray. Despite the fact that all of my characters are significantly slower than many of my opponent's bounty hunters here, I was able to take several turns with my own characters before the bounty hunters were able to go, due to the turn meter gain mechanics of BB-8's kit. I immediately used the mind trick from Jedi Training Ray on Bossk in an attempt to keep him from taunting. You don't want to get stuck behind a Bossk taunt for an extended period of time with a team as squishy as Resistance. The Jango lead team for bounty hunters isn't as resilient as the Bossk lead team, but it's significantly faster and can really cause a lot of headaches and do a lot of damage to you before you even get to take one turn. I was unfortunately unable to stop Bossk from taunting, but I was able to beat Jango and stun Boba before his taunt was really able to do a lot of damage to me. I'm not really one of those people who says that speed is the only factor that matters in this game. I think that that's an overgeneralization, and that it's often used as an excuse by players with worse mods or playing ability. However, against this particular team, having the ability to go first was imperative to my success. As we progress through this series, you'll note that my take on bounty hunters is that they should be used mostly for offense and rarely on defense because of how efficient they can be on offense in many circumstances. I will admit, however, that in this round, seeing Jango and a super fast bounty hunter team in the front lines made me think for a lot longer than I had anticipated. After seeing two mostly negligible teams in my opponent's first back row, I was able to expand the scope of which teams I was allowed to use against my opponent's front row. The worst case scenario in my opponent's remaining unknown zone was that they may have a Jedi Knight Revan and a Padme or General Grievous squad waiting for me. I highly doubted that I would see Grievous at all in this match, as my opponent would most likely want to use that team on offense as insurance against me placing my own Darth Revan team on defense. But even if I did see their General Grievous team and Jedi Knight Revan team in the back, I knew that I would have the teams to be able to face both and beat them without needing to rely on Traya. I really wanted to use my Traya squad here for a number of different reasons. In reality, you could really call this team a Nihilus squad instead of a Traya squad, because Nihilus is the one who's going to be doing all of the heavy lifting. This particular Qi'ra squad was a trap squad for several different reasons. To start, there are two different characters here, both of them scoundrel, who are capable of reviving enemy characters. That means that even if I was able to demolish Gear 13 L3, she might come back in the next turn without having to do anything. In addition, L3 under the Qi'ra leadership can cause a lot of problems. Under the Qi'ra lead, L3 is remarkably resilient. I've had circumstances where I've defeated the entire other enemy team, but was unable to use even 5 full characters to beat L3 by the time I timed out. And finally, we have Nest, who, after we've defeated all other characters, is fully capable of timing out even the strongest teams before you have the ability to take her out. I contemplated for a long time using bounty hunters here instead of a Traya squad. Bounty hunters, the way I run them with the Jango Unique Zated and Boba Fett's Execute, can deny characters the ability to revive, and therefore negate a lot of the damage that this team can do. But that would require my entire bounty hunter team. I wanted to earn the feat that required an undersized squad to be used to beat another team. And as I said before, I thought that the likelihood of running into a really strong couple of teams in the back row was fairly insignificant. Getting 59 banners against a team as perversely resilient as the Qi'ra team was also probably not possible with bounty hunters. How many of you share my irrational fear of facing a Rex Wampa team on defense? Yes, that was a question, not a statement of fact. The truth about a squad like this is that it can be entirely too easy to underestimate. Only Wampa, and maybe Chirrut sometimes, can do any real damage. But given enough time to ramp up his offensive output, Wampa will literally rip your face off. Now, before you argue that the Wampa won't actually be ripping your real-life face off, but rather your character's faces, remember that this game's main conceit is that we're playing on a holotable, and therefore the characters don't have faces at all, but are rather blurs of light that we as humans interpret as faces. It would instead be a much better use of your time to argue against my use of literally, and instead that I meant the word figuratively, to which I would respond, that's fair. You'll notice that throughout this match, I've avoided hitting Wampa at all, despite him being the only credible threat on the entire team. That's because Wampa counters, and when Wampa counters, he counters hard. So the goal needs to be that once you can either daze or stun Wampa, depending on which team you're using, you need to pile on him as fast as you can and demolish him. If I'm being honest, we can probably withstand the majority of Wampa's counterattacks. But that would lower our protection, and we're going for a full 60 banners because this is Grand Arena and banners do matter. Watching this match again, I believe that taking Embo out and inserting Cad Bane in his stead would have been a better decision on my end. Cad Bane can both stun and dispel, which are both important parts of being able to beat this team. Plus, Cad Bane doesn't throw his hat, which is probably one of the most enjoyable moves in the entire game. But in the context of Grand Arena, where you want to preserve as much protection as possible, Embo's hat throw can actually cost you banners. I wanted to say something here about his hat throw not being fun anymore, but I just can't. It's still ridiculously fun and always a temptation to me, no matter what circumstance. Even in hindsight, I'm impressed by my ability to restrain myself for the greater good and 60 banners. Being able to take 60 banners off of this team on my first try was really important. Regardless of what my opponent had stashed in their backline, they had clearly saved a lot of good teams for offense. Fortunately, my opponent had not stashed two remarkable defensive teams in the back row. Instead, they were pretty commonplace in terms of what you really expect in Grand Arena matches. All of the teams in the back were well modded, but were not particularly difficult matchups for the teams that I had remaining. My sisters were the most obvious, credible threat remaining in the back line, and so I decided to use Jedi Revan. Besides my Jedi Revan team, I also had Padme, Emperor Palpatine, Troopers, and First Order, which should all be enough to take any of the remaining teams out with close to maximum banners. You'll see that I took Plo Koon out in favor of Ezra. It might have been wiser to take another understrength win against my opponent, the way I had already done using Traya and the Triumvirate against Qi'ra. There's another feat that requires 5 understrength wins against opponents in your next 12 matches, and it would probably be wise of me to try to earn that feat because I'm fairly sure that there's going to be at least 2 more behind it. But I wanted to see if I could use Ezra to get maximum banners against this Night Sisters team. Under Jedi Revan, characters who attack out of turn regenerate their protection, and I wanted to see if using Ezra here could take advantage of that. Theoretically, every single character on this team can assist, even Grandmaster Yoda, as long as he gets tactical advantage from Revan. Against most Night Sisters team, your first target really needs to be Daka, especially if Daka has her Zeta applied. With the advent of Gear 13 and the crazy amount of health that Daka gains from Gear 13, I'm actually considering using the Daka Zeta on my own Night Sisters. If you kill Zombie too many times before smiting Daka, her maximum health pool can get seriously out of control and be extremely difficult to manage for a lot of teams. I mean, Nihilus doesn't really care, but bounty hunters probably would. And Daka can single-handedly keep the Night Sisters running for the entire match unless you can deal with her in short order. Now, my victory has been assured in this matchup almost from the very start, but what I really want to do is get full banners if possible. And so, we're going to try to stun Spirit as much as we can, and use assists killing Zombie over and over and over again in order to regenerate our protection and health. So, using Ezra, please don't read anything into it that he is some kind of Night Sister Slayer, because he's really not. I mean, he's decent at it, as you could see, he does some good damage, but there's nothing particularly strong about using Ezra against Night Sisters. Instead, he's good at a gimmick of trying to give us as many banners as possible, against a team that traditionally takes a lot of banners off of you. I'm very interested to see what kind of Clone Wars reworks the various Jedi are going to get, because right now, Jedi Knight Revan is short one Jedi that needs to be with him permanently. Ezra and Plo are decent placeholders for now, but Jedi Revan could really use a fifth member who is permanently aside to help him. I'm relatively sure that at least Plo is going to end up on another team, and Ezra can really work well with Phoenix if you have that team fully Zeta'd and geared, which means you also probably enjoy Pain. I have them fully geared, but don't worry, I don't actually like Pain. I'm just stupid. I wasn't really sure if First Order was the best team to take against another First Order team sporting zBarriss, but I decided that Padme, my only other really worthy team, might end up stalling out against KRU and Kylo because of her reliance on health percentage-based attacks. Generally speaking, I like doing mirror matches because of how much of a struggle the artificial intelligence has in controlling the opponent's characters. You'll note that I'm jumping around a lot in my various attacks here. Things can spiral out of control really quick when you're facing a good First Order team, and so you want to keep the situation as controlled as possible, meaning you stun the different Kylos as often as possible and keep taunt away from anyone that you can. That doesn't mean that it's always going to be possible, but when the situation and circumstances dictate it, that's probably the advisable course. The two Kylos and First Order Executioner, and Stormtrooper for that matter, can all have some pretty ridiculous health pools, and so I decided that if it was possible, I would focus down zBarriss first. Her ability to heal passively on crits against her own team can be really frustrating if you're not dealing enough damage. But it's not a leadership, and so if we take her out, the ability disappears, and now the only healing we have to contend with is the already unreasonable amount of healing available to First Order under KRU's leadership. You probably already knew this, but it's wise to take out First Order Executioner as quickly as possible. He ramps up his damage over time, very similar to the way Wampa operates, but perhaps less obviously. You'll see now that most of the moves that I make are intended to help me get maximum banners once again. First Order regenerates protection and health based on the number of buffs and debuffs that are distributed throughout the match. The healing can really add up over time, and I'm still curious as to how Ewoks can beat this team. Speaking of which, this particular First Order team that I'm facing was designed specifically to counter Ewoks. Because of how little damage each Ewok attack does, they actually heal the First Order team more than they will hurt them. Theoretically, an Ewok team sporting C-3PO could actually do some good work against this team, just because the number of exposes they would get could probably take Barriss down in short order. At this point, we have 3 full zones cleared, and all that we have left is an Old Republic team led by Zeta Carth, and a Phoenix team with no Zetas to speak of. I had an Emperor Palpatine team, troopers, and Padme. Padme is the obvious choice to take against Old Republic, though I think Emperor Palpatine would also work in this circumstance. One factor to watch in a lot of the different Padme matchups is how fast they generate courage, which is the blue buff that you'll see appear above their heads in short order. Every time they get a stack of 5 courage or more and make an attack, they're able to do 40% of the opponent's maximum health. And that's on top of whatever damage they also do. You add the courage buff by accumulating stacks of protection up that are generated in various ways throughout the team. I do think that using Padme against an Old Republic team like this is kind of a waste in most circumstances, because it's capable of doing so much more damage and defeating so many other team compositions. But Padme is uniquely suited to beating this Old Republic team, simply because the Old Republic team has so many assists, and a lot of their Stacks of protection up on the Padme team are generated from those out-of-turn attacks. If you want to feel like you're a good player, use Padme against Old Republic teams. You'll feel like an all-star. I had a couple options to take on the Zeta-less Phoenix team, in the fact that I had troopers and I had Emperor Palpatine and his various cronies. It would be a losing argument to debate that troopers are more flexible or powerful than an Emperor Palpatine team. However, troopers do provide something unique that Emperor Palpatine really doesn't, and in this case, that's why I chose to go with troopers. Troopers can regenerate protection, whereas the Palpatine team really has to watch themselves and rely on Thrawn using his special ability to regenerate 20% protection. Before the match, I did my research and looked at the maximum health and protection that each of these Phoenix members had. Hera had the lowest effective hit points out of anyone, and it wasn't even close. Troopers can be used against a wide variety of enemy teams. The one absolutely imperative rule to using troopers as a counter against most teams is that they have to get a kill within their first full volley of shots. Because most of the troopers have some kind of area of attack, they're also softening up their second target, which can then be killed using Death Trooper's Death Mark. Troopers are almost worthless on defense, and I don't know that I've ever seen them on defense in Grand Arena. Plus, troopers are a lot of fun. I highly recommend you keeping them around for your offense. In Grand Arena, I defined a perfect attack as 60 banners. Despite the fact that you can earn more, 60 is typically the most you're going to be able to earn. In this circumstance, I was outside of the maximum banners by 11 points. I dropped 6 against Darth Revan, 4 against Bounty Hunters, and 1 against Qi'ra and Nest and all the other smugglers. My opponent hadn't attacked, but they had kept a lot of teams on offense. I did feel relatively confident here, however, and my confidence was rewarded with the win. At this level of play, I expect to be full cleared every Grand Arena match, simply because of the number of teams available to these top GP players. As such, I was extremely surprised to find that 2 of my teams had actually lived through the match. I've turned up the contrast on these screenshots so you can see the teams better. As you can see, Night Sisters were able to snag 1 win, even operating on the front line. And my Commander Luke team, which has not snagged any wins at all for my opponents, even got a win. I was pleasantly surprised in the next zone by having won 2 battles before the Geonosians ended up losing. I would be extremely interested to know what my opponent used in their loss to them. Apparently, my opponent had lost momentum by the time they got to my Ewok zone and did not attack my Trap Qi'ra team. At any rate, I had won my first match and was primed for the semifinals in my first round of 3. If you enjoyed this video, I would appreciate a like rating if you think of it, which you just did because of the words that are coming out of my mouth. If you're interested in seeing a compiled version of all my different Grand Arena exploits and all the different counters to teams that I've used over the course of the last 2 Grand Arena seasons, please feel free to follow the link in the video description that links to my Google Sheets database of all my different Grand Arena counters and what teams I used to fight them. Otherwise, thank you so much for watching, and remember that in all things, Za'reth prevails.